Hello, hello, everyone. Finally, we're live. Okay. First of all, happy Friday. I am so excited about today. I know a lot of you have been getting the emails and getting my Instagram posts. I'm so excited for today because we get to talk to the one and only small business reporter at Business Insider, Jennifer Ortakales Dawkins. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We're so grateful that you could be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
So I'm going to do a quick little introduction while I have people coming in here. So Jennifer, you've been with Business Insider now for around 3 years, right?
Mhm.
And you cover mainly on entrepreneurship and small businesses for Insider Strategy Team. So you primarily cover how to launch, scale a new business, and you focus on what brand new entrepreneurs and side hustlers, yes, that's us right here, should do in the first years of starting up. And you also dig into what platforms and tools they can use, how to get funding, how to set your branding apart and market to the right audience through social media. Best of all, you are here with me in New York, so you're not too far away from me. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it that you had me here on the show. I'm excited.
I'm so glad we connected and we bonded really, really quickly. And I feel like what you're covering is so aligned with so many of the scrappy, amazing, small but mighty entrepreneurs that we have in our group. And that's really my audience, right? The small but visionary. So before we get started, I want to talk a little bit more about Business Insider. Now, there's so many different publications. Business Insider obviously has a really great reputation. Can you talk to me a little bit about how it's different than other publications?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to mention is that Business Insider really started digital first. So they've always really been about publishing things online in a way that resonates with readers today and not in a, old school, old fashioned newspaper magazine way, as much as we love print. It's not the way anymore. So I think they're really in tune to just knowing what their readers want and what their readers are interested in, especially in this digital media age. And I think, secondly, it is really focused on just getting inside of companies that everyone wants to know more about, people's favorite companies or maybe their favorite companies to hate. Either way, it's always about kind of getting beneath what is actually happening in business right now, with all of the latest companies, with all of the biggest companies, depending on the vertical. So it's just like really about kind of understanding business from all angles, and I think it's also really approachable. I think it's not, like I said, it's not like a lot of these legacy brands. Where they publish headlines that are kind of lofty and general and broad. We publish headlines where it's like, this is exactly what you're getting. Here's what you're about to read. Here's this person doing something really interesting. Here's how someone made this much money. Um, you know, we
Right,
want
like
to be
this one, the
direct.
22-year-old freelancer plans to use a month of Instagram under an hour, right? This one.
Yeah, exactly. It's very direct. It's very clear. We try to be, punchy and fun and exciting, but as at the same time, letting you know exactly what you're getting. This
Yeah.
is exactly the story we're telling you. It's not, you know, a very broad, like, oh, this founder explains how they raise funding. Like, that doesn't mean anything to people. Whereas if you say a founder of a, like, I just did this pitch deck story today, two founders who founded a tattoo aftercare brand got $2 million in funding, including from investors like Mark Cuban and Stefan Diggs. So it's like, we like to really be specific about what people's accomplishments are and how you're going to learn from them, and why this person that we're talking to has authority on that topic.
Right. And you touch on something because in my CPR method, it's all about specificity. And part of being specific is also like relevance. Like, why is it relevant to right now? Right. So I'm reading through all of your amazing coverage. By the way, you're one busy lady. You're always churning out stories. So congrats to that. But you talk about very topical things. So like PPP running out, right? You talk about like what's happening in supply chain. And so can you talk to me a little bit about like what you're looking at right now, like what kind of things that are really sparking your interest?
Hmm. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things right now is just the movement of entrepreneurship right now and what that looks like. Obviously, 10 years ago, it looked so much different. And so there's a lot of innovation happening. Um, right now, this year, and ever since last year in the pandemic, I think a lot of things have changed. A lot of things have accelerated, as people like to say. And so really just diving into how is entrepreneurship changing, for better, for worse, like what is the pulse on running a business today, and what does that mean for people? How are people changing it? How are people maybe breaking rules that used to be established in the industry? So I think it's really just about exploring all the different ways people are being inventive and changing the climate for entrepreneurship. Such as, I'm really fascinated by like online companies, businesses that started online, no brick and mortar, maybe just started a website and then growing from there, or even on social media. Maybe they market on Instagram, TikTok, and are finding a lot of success from there. So I think it's just like really cool to kind of see how people are reinventing the wheel. The wheel of entrepreneurship will always stay the same. The basics of, how to run a company, how to grow, how to scale, how to get funding. But along the way, you're going to find things that are a little bit different, and people doing it differently, which is exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I know for my audience is mostly women of color. And so
Mhm.
is that an area or like stories that you're really interested in, is covering diverse founders from maybe underrepresented voices?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, that's like a huge mission of our entire team, which I have an editor and two other reporters who work with me on the small business team. And we're always looking for diverse voices. We don't want to just tell the same stories. We don't want to make it feel exclusionary, like you have to be a certain type of person to run a business. I think success looks very different for everyone. And so the more that we're able to showcase that and showcase how all types of people are gaining funding, starting businesses, getting success, making $1 million, whatever that is. I think it's good to just show the diversity of entrepreneurs out there doing amazing things.
Yeah. So, I know you cover a lot of kind of like associations with like big name brands, or if you have a famous investor, or if you've raised millions of dollars. What if our audience isn't people who've raised millions of dollars and they're really scrappy and they're starting really small, but they have an incredible mission? Is that something that you also would be interested in, or you have to be like already raising millions of dollars?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I would say for the most part, we want authority. So if we're going to do a profile on an entrepreneur, we need to be able to, one, prove to our readers that this person is worth listening to. Like maybe they have some skin in the game, maybe they have some proven success that other entrepreneurs can learn from. So that's why, when you see things like, oh, $1 million in revenue, or, however many million in funding, that is all essentially what, to the reader's mind, is establishing their authority of, okay, this is someone I need to listen to. That doesn't mean that like we won't tell stories without those things. I think that it's just more about, it depends on the story. So for example, one of the stories I did recently was on holiday shopping and supply chains, and how, that has all just been so crazy. And so I interviewed a couple business owners who, it wasn't at all about their success or how much money they've made, or how many customers they have. It was just about, okay, so this is, supply chains are a huge deal for them right now, and how they're running their business and how they will be able to accommodate the holiday shopping season.
Is it this one,
So
four-way small businesses, or the one before
the one right below it.
that? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, so things like that where it's a little bit more topical, I would say it's not as
Mhm.
important for us to show like, you made
Yeah.
this much money, you're this successful. But if we are doing a profile, readers want to hear from people who kind of have like
Mhm.
some kind of milestone to put into context. Why would I listen to this business owner over
Yeah.
this one?
What about getting press? That's why I always say if you get press, that's authority right there.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that depends. Like sometimes we have, written about entrepreneurs who made it on like Forbes lists, and 30 under 30, or Gen Z entrepreneurs, that kind of a thing. I think sometimes readers like that. They like knowing that maybe a legacy publication that's known for ranking entrepreneurs essentially has covered them. But I would say it's not quite as important, because we also like to tell people's stories first. Like we, Insider wants to be the first to maybe profile a business owner who hasn't really gotten any press. So I would
Right.
say that's not quite as important. Sometimes, we'll look at that. Sometimes it'll help us maybe find sources, but for the most part, we're always looking for, we want to be the first to put out a story on a business owner.
Yeah. I mean, these seem like everyday normal people, who own neighborhood
Yeah.
shops.
Mm-hmm.
So that's awesome that you cover them. You also touched upon something which is, obviously it's important to be specific, but relevant and topical. And so right now we're approaching this season where there's holiday shopping, there's Black Friday, there's hiring for the holidays. And I remember I cold called and got a tiny little startup onto Mornings with Maria on Fox, on Fox Business, and she interviews like all the presidents, because it was around relating it to kind of the shortage of workers around the holiday season. So can you talk to me a little bit more about why it's so important to tie your pitch to something relevant, like a holiday season, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that really just goes back to the news cycle, right? So, reporters, part of our job is tapping into what people want to know, what people are maybe worried about, what people are excited about, what are people talking about right now, And so, if you can already put yourself into those narratives, that helps us to say, okay, cool, like maybe you would be a good source for this particular news story that's happening or this particular trend that's happening. Because for us, we will always be reader oriented, we will always put readers first. If readers want to know about a particular topic or trend, that's what we're going to write about. Once in a while we have our own ideas, and I'll pitch stories all the time about things that might not be necessarily newsy, but maybe fascinating in some way. But there typically, even then, is still some sort of reason we're writing it now and not 2 months ago or 2 months from now.
Yes, I cannot give you enough snaps and claps for that, because I always say relevance is the most important part of the CPR method, because it tells the journalist why they should open it right now and why not just put it away for 5 years later, right? So
Mm-hmm.
things like, back to school or Black Friday shopping or, whatever, SBA loans, we're tying it to a new piece of policy, maybe tying it to something that's breaking news on what Amazon's doing, because they're not going to go
Mm-hmm.
after you if you're a small business owner. So now that we're actually getting into what you like in a pitch from a theoretical point of view, you've affirmed that relevance is important. What about the actual pitch? Like, what do you like to see in the subject line, or what do you not like to see in the pitch that's immediately like it just kind of irks you a little bit?
Yeah, I think the number one thing I don't like to see in a pitch is when it seems very copy and pasted. Like, I can tell that this person sent it to a bunch of other reporters sometimes, and that's the aggravating thing too. Is like, it's a great thing that Insider has become so big now. Like, we have a lot of reporters, but we run into the problem all the time where PR agents and I would say actually less so business owners, which, because they're kind of doing it on their own, but PR people will send a ton of reporters at Insider the same exact pitch. And then it's kind of like, because a lot of our teams are just so big and growing all the time, we don't always know exactly, I don't know if a colleague of mine on a totally different team got the same pitch that I did. So you can immediately tell when it's sort of just a pitch that's copy and pasted and just sent out to a ton of reporters, and then it doesn't really feel that genuine. It kind of feels like just an email blast instead of an actual, like, you did your research to figure out what I report on, what things I'm interested in covering, and then how our publication is maybe different from others. And so that brings me to, do your research. Before you even write a pitch or, come up with a subject line, research the reporter you're talking to, get to know my work. Like, I can easily tell if you've read the stories that I've written, and I can easily tell if you're aware of the types of topics I tend to cover, because every reporter is a little bit different, some of my colleagues might have a very specific focus on one type of, like, certain industries or one type of entrepreneur. But, if you pitch a story that kind of isn't of interest in that topic or isn't really related, you're probably just going to be thrown in the trash.
Yeah.
So the best chance you have of really resonating with a reporter is to do your research, read what they write, look into the topics that they cover. And then also same kind of goes for the publication at large. Like, be familiar with the way that they frame things, be familiar with what they seem to publish regularly. Like we just mentioned, Business Insider is very big on, yeah, we want to see numbers. We want to see like authority in the sources that we're profiling or talking to. So make sure you establish that in your pitch. One of the biggest things I end up having to ask business owners as a follow-up, or even, PR agents, is like, but can you show me the numbers? Like, this is a cool story. And, oh, this is such a heartfelt story about how you started your business. This is great. I'm inspired, but our readers are not going to be interested if
Yeah,
you want to
validate
share
it.
like revenue, or if you can't share revenue, how did you grow your followers on Instagram? Or like, is there some kind of data that you can give us to
Yes.
kind of back up that this is relevant to people?
Yes, and that brings me to the credibility part in my CPR method is you want to like make yourself credible. It doesn't mean that you have to be featured. It doesn't mean that you have to be funded by Mark Cuban, but even something like for example, I just wrote a pitch for someone yesterday. She is in her 50s or 60s and she helps mostly seniors get, rid of pain. And so in the credibility piece in my CPR pitch, what I wrote for her is like, I have helped over 2,000 people over the age of 60 navigate the mysterious world of pain. And so that's why I kept asking her, like, how many people have you helped? Like, do you have any certifications? So that's what I meant by like the credibility piece. Does she have $1 million, funded by someone else? No. Right. But that shows her impact.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm
Yeah.
glad that you agree on that.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great point too. Like, a clientele list is another great example of something you can use, because obviously, like, followers is one thing, but today, everyone has a ton of followers. Like, that's kind of not as mysterious, I think, to a lot of people. Whereas maybe if you built your client list in a year from 10 people to 1,000 people, cool. Like, that obviously shows that you had an upward trajectory and that you were doing something that works. And maybe more entrepreneurs need to know what you did right.
100%. There's so many ways to validate yourself and to give the reporter a sense that you have authority that doesn't have to do with revenue. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I always encourage people on my master class on everything. It's like, think creatively about how you can establish yourself. And I think a lot of founders are like, I don't have the credibility. I'm not ready to pitch. And so they don't even press a send button. And my whole mission is like, just send it. Like, you're never going to know like what's going to happen. It's a relationship. So can you talk to me a little bit about why it's so important for founders to not be afraid to follow up and to view it as a relationship as opposed to like, oh, she didn't respond. Like, that's,
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's the thing too, especially when reporters are working directly with business owners. Like, it's a little bit different, in the PR world, like, reporters know you're going to hear from PR people all the time. Like, you're going to get a ton of emails, and to the point where it's kind of a little too much to even handle all of those relationships, right? Whereas a business owner, it's much more personal because it feels like, okay, this is my direct access to this world that I'm covering. I want to know what's on business owners' minds. I want to know how they're reacting to a recent news event that happened, and so my best advice is to, not give up if you don't get a response. Most of the time, I mean, I can attest to most days I do not get to even half of the emails in my inbox. Like, there's so much in there. Sometimes I don't even get back to people for weeks because I will, mark it as maybe something I want to get back to because the subject line looks interesting to me, but I have all these other stories going on that I have to prioritize, and I won't get back to you for, several days. So don't be discouraged by that. I think it's really just like, I would suggest maybe follow up maybe once, like, not to be too overbearing because obviously, like, we're busy and we have lots of things coming in all at once. Follow up once, and then if you don't hear back, don't worry about it. Like, you might hear back, you might not. And then maybe give it like another few weeks or a month or two and try again. Just like reach out again. And like you said, using kind of a relevant topic might be a good segue for you to like be noticed in a reporter's inbox, because if you have something to say or an experience to share of your own that is directly relatable to something happening in the world, that is a really good way to kind of get in and get noticed. And like, to give you an example, I've there's like at least a handful of business owners that I kind of go to anytime my editor's like, this happened today. We need to cover it. Let's get a couple business owners and what they say. Like, I know if like I have a good amount of people I can just shoot an email to right away. Hey, business owner, what do you think of this? Or did your business get impacted by this? And an example of that this week was when the Facebook and Instagram outage happened. And I knew, oh, yeah, tons of people I've talked to before for previous articles, I'm sure were affected by it. So I reached out to a bunch of people who I've talked to before and was able to get, a couple of people on the phone that day. Just because they were sitting, by their emails, probably frantic, not knowing what to do. And they see my like breaking news story subject line, and they're able to just like hop on the phone really quickly. So I think just also that ability to like be flexible when news happens. It is like a really crazy cycle of kind of like we reach out to a ton of people as much as we can. We get maybe a few people on the phone, and then we have to like run a story. So being able to kind of respond quickly also is important in those situations.
Yeah, and that's the thing about follow-up. It's like you can keep following up, but changing the context a little bit, because every day there's a different thing in the news. So
Mhm.
you might have a pitch that's about, I don't know, social media, and then boom, Facebook is down. So there you go. There's your new way to follow up, right? I
Mhm.
can't tell you
Yeah.
how many times I've pitched for a client. It was like no, 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 and then like something happens and we relate it to the news, and we're like, if and then it's like boom. So that just goes to show like don't give up. So another thing is, a lot of people are like, well, if you cover me once, you might not cover me again. Is that true or false? Because from what you're saying, it's there's no limit to how many times you can keep going back to that person, right?
Yeah, I would say that's false. I mean, I think typically we don't, we're not probably going to write more than one profile on you. We're not going to do like a big feature on everything about your business and how you started it and your whole journey as an entrepreneur, and then like do that same story over again. Like, we're not going to repeat stories, but we will continue talking to sources. And just like I said, the one of the women that I reached out to for the Instagram Facebook story this week, I had profiled her and how she'd been using Facebook Live for shopping, like for selling to customers. And that was like months ago. And I ended up actually including her in a webinar we did on live shopping. So it was like, we were building a relationship and able to kind of, anytime something live shopping related or Facebook related happens, I remember, oh yeah, she's like literally right there. I know exactly who to talk to for this. And then maybe she knows more business owners that I can talk to kind of expand my sources.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's like just really important to remember that there's always a new way to like frame your story, or just to have input. Like, sometimes we're not looking to tell your life story. Sometimes we're just looking to put a news story into context, and we need sources to be able to corroborate, like, oh yeah, this is happening in this part of the world, or this is a problem, or this great thing happened. Here are some quotes from business owners who have experienced it firsthand.
Yeah, exactly. I always say like we got a lot of founders, they're so used to telling the story of themselves and their hero journey. A lot of times it's not super relevant. It doesn't mean it's not inspiring, but you're more worried about what's relevant, what's happening in the news, where are the stories, and how can you attach yourself to something that people are talking about already. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not saying like this is something completely new, but it's like, have you thought about looking at it that way? And so when I do my master classes, when I do like my pitch writing sessions, I'm always thinking about, okay, we're not reinventing the wheel. It's like, how can we peel the layer of the onion so it might be something interesting, right? That's a little
Mm-hmm.
bit not what you're talking about. So we're getting some questions here about like, how do you pitch without sounding spammy-ish, especially if you're working in the entertainment industry? I don't know
Hmm.
if that's something you can speak to.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the most spammy thing is when it's just broad and kind of a sweeping, like, cover my business because we're cool.
Yeah.
It's like we get tons of those pitches all the time. That's nothing really new or different. You're just at that point, you just sound like another business owner who is not differentiated from anyone else. Whereas I would say, to avoid sounding spammy, being specific, explaining exactly what your successes are, just like we, talked about that credibility aspect. And And again, like I said, don't make it feel super copy pasted and, impersonal. Like if you can actually make a connection with the reporter on like, oh, I just read one of the best things, honestly. And like maybe this is just because, we all appreciate that validation, but one of the best things is when a business owner reaches out and was like, oh, I just read your article on such and such and I found it really interesting. I actually have a business that's been impacted by this, and maybe they're not, the best person for another story on that particular topic, but it grabs my interest and it makes me feel like, okay, they actually like spent some time getting to know what I write and what is like relevant to our audience. So,
Yes.
yeah, just again, like kind of the same points as before, just like doing your research and making sure that you're providing something relevant and not just
Yes.
kind of shipping out mass emails to every reporter that you can talk
Yeah.
to.
I'm so glad you're validating the method that took me years to hack because, I have never worked in an agency and I still have never worked in an agency. And I just figured out I was so sick and tired of getting my pitches ignored. I started to look at patterns of what worked. And I realized like you need to have that specificity, you need to have that relevance, that credibility, and the point of view. So thank you so much for that. And give us all the momentum to know that we don't need to rely on an agency and that it really is quite refreshing when you as a founder connect directly with the journalist because then you're talking to the person directly without a middleman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you
Exactly.
talk to me a little bit more about so another thing I like to write in the pitch is I'm happy to connect you with other people in my audience, right? Can you talk to me? Is that valuable? A lot of founders feel like that scarcity mindset kicks in. It's like, well, what if the journalist just skips over me? But doesn't that make them even more valuable?
It does. Like I mentioned before, I have a handful of business owners who I will reach out to periodically because I know that either one, they're very well connected within the entrepreneurship, within their the entrepreneurship climate within their area. So maybe it's like a particular place like Miami, or I know they're really connected in Brooklyn, or I know they're really connected in Chicago. So it's like I know that maybe if there's something happening in that area, who to go to say, hey, like who can you connect me with to talk to? And also, it's the kind of thing where, you know, a lot of times I do that kind of already, like after I've already written about them. So, kind of what we were mentioning before, as to like, we'll already write about you and then follow up with like, hey, who else do you know? So it's kind of like passing it along, and I think that's kind of how a lot of entrepreneurs work, hopefully anyway, is like they are very tight knit communities within their areas, within different communities, different types of companies and industries. So I think it's like really important to kind of just like pass it on, and it's good as a reporter to build up a whole like Rolodex of business owners to talk to, depending on what topic you're interested in covering. And I don't think that it's gonna like we're not really we're not gonna like pass over you just because you've given us contacts to someone else. It's usually because we've already talked to you and we already know that you're trustworthy and credible, and like you've already provided some kind of insight to us before, so we're not necessarily going to do that for like someone who just cold emailed us and we don't know and like we haven't ever covered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, building a relationship is so important. I think a lot of founders stop at the first email, but it's like, are any stories published without a follow up? Like, we got to follow up, right? I want to share one of the articles that we talked about before. It's a really great coverage. Can you talk to us a little bit about this? What you wrote about, which is a very amazing story, that one that you're quite proud of. It's about pivoting during the pandemic. So let me pull that up. And maybe you can talk to us about how it was pitched and kind of all the elements of like specificity and like, what, like why this actually made a story that you wanted to write.
Mm. Yeah, it's actually interesting because this one was kind of assigned to me, which doesn't
Mm.
happen that often. Actually, one of the things I love about my company is like my editors give me a lot of free reign to kind of pitch my own stories and go after the stuff that I really want to tell. But this was kind of more of like a, retrospective. Let's look at the last year and how the pandemic has impacted people, and especially when we talk about masks, because that's been like one of the biggest products to just skyrocket in demand over the last year and now year and a half. And so we wanted to just look at, what did businesses do and how was maybe pivoting to mass essential for their businesses to even survive. And so it was a pretty like simple idea that my editors handed me. And then I was really excited about it because it's really cool to be able to be a reporter where you're like kind of documenting history, like it's kind of nerdy and to say, but it's really fun to be able to say, these business owners went through all this stuff during the pandemic, and now we're going to write a story to like commemorate that and to really show people like, here's the things that people have been through and the decisions they had to make and the hard things they had to face. And so we kind of just like took it from a very simple idea of, business owners who pivoted to mass during the pandemic and how it saved their companies. And this is actually to kind of bring it all together. A lot of the sources that I used were previously in my inbox. Like I either from, PR agents who had sent me, oh, here's this entrepreneur we think you'd love to cover, but I never ended up, covering them, or maybe I didn't have time to follow up. And then just by the way that I organize my inbox, I have things flagged on like, oh, this might be a good source for a retail type story. Or
So I
this
just want to
might
take a
be,
moment. So everyone,
yeah,
if you're multitasking, come back to us because this is so important. So just because you don't respond to someone's pitch doesn't mean you're not reading it. It doesn't mean that you're not self-organizing for the next time you're assigned something. So this is
exactly.
another reason why people need to pitch, because you never know who's watching.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I have a whole, and I can like explain my system to you too, but like I have a whole system where I label emails. I still, to be completely honest, I still throw away a lot of emails because I cannot like leave that much sitting there. But anything that piques my interest, literally anything, I will flag with specific labels to either come back to it another day when maybe I'm looking for story ideas, or come back to it when I need sources for a very specific story idea. And so that's what this story was like, okay, we know what we want the story to be. Now we need to find the business owners to kind of fit into that story. And so, yeah, a lot of these were like people that I had just flagged them in my inbox, kind of archived those emails away. And then as soon as I needed to do the story, I literally just type in my Gmail search box, like masks, pandemic pivot, like retail company or clothing company, and like whatever those kind of keywords are for my inbox. And then I have essentially all these search results of people who have been in my inbox previously. Maybe I hadn't even followed up with their email at all, but then was able to connect with them. So I think that was like also, that's a good example too, to kind of show you how things do come back up. Like things do resurface in my inbox, even if you sent an email and I never responded. It might not mean that I threw it away. It could also mean that like I'm just saving it for the right story at the right time.
Your words are like music to my ears because this is what I tell my group all the time. And if you watch my masterclass, if you're in this PR starter pack, you understand that building a relationship and having that energy, it's always going to pay off more than just like a transaction or demanding that they cover you. And so a lot of times the founders who are most successful understand that. And so they're thinking creatively, okay, my pitch wasn't responded to. What is happening in the news so I can repitch again? And a lot of times that leads to something. Whereas founders are just so like, well, you know what? The silver bullet didn't work. I'm going to stop. Right. And they're closing
Mhm.
themselves up to so much. So you've just basically affirmed everything that I say. So thank you so much for that. And we're about out of time, and I'm so happy you're going to be on my podcast. So that's what we're going to actually get off of this and start recording the episode for my podcast. I'm just so grateful that you're here. Is there anything else that you want to ask Jennifer while we're here? Thank you so much. Oh, another thing is, what are so obviously like some of the bad pitches that you receive that's like, cover me, I'm the first to do something. Like, what are some of the other pitches that are just like not appropriate for you?
Yeah, I guess I would say one of the biggest things to me is like launches. Like if you're launching a new product, we don't really cover that. So if you're trying to kind of tout like, oh, we just launched this new clothing collection, or we just launched a new product, I'm sorry, but that's just like not what we do. Like, and that might be great for other publications. A lot of other publications are a little bit more like announcement focused, where they will cover the latest product from whatever company, but that's just not what we do. So if you're trying to kind of like get your product, I guess I would say like don't start with the product. Like, don't put the product front and center, because we don't really care that much about that. We're not really geared to like the consumer side of things. We're geared towards like talking to business owners about business, and business owners are probably not really interested in your product that you just launched.
Yes, thank you so much. This is another thing I say too, is how can you step away from your product and not make it so like salesy, because you're not a vehicle for their free advertising.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also another thing. So thank you so much for being here. We have had steadily over 20 people live like on a Friday, and they did not like, I still see people, usually they start dropping off. Nobody has dropped off. So thank you so much for being here. Please subscribe to Business Insider, because that is how journalism and journalists get rewarded. I think now with the lines of influencer and journalism blurring, it's so important to support writers like Jennifer, who actually are rolling up their sleeves and finding small businesses and not just out there like look, on Instagram. So please support her by clicking on the article and subscribing. It's literally $1 to start, like a trial for Business Insider, and you're contributing to the fact that journalism is still alive and well, and just contributing to the fact that like we have amazing reporters like Jennifer. So thank you so much. Please subscribe, follow her. Her information is on Business Insider. You can see all of the stories that she wrote, and give it a try. It's $1. For those of you who enjoyed the session, please do #replay, tag your friends, and don't forget to watch the PR masterclass, where I go through a lot of the things that Jennifer talks about, but kind of in like a way that's like, how can I actualize everything Jennifer's saying in the framework? So I actually go through what the pitch is. I give you a real pitch reveal that got onto Fast Company. So the stuff all works. I just only teach what I know. I've never worked at an agency, so I'm only teaching you what I know. So if you found this information helpful, go to gloriachildpr.com masterclass. And again, don't forget to read Jennifer Dawkins, like all of her Business Insider reporting. I think you publish stories like how many times a week?
It depends, but at least like a couple, like 2 to 3 times a week, sometimes
Perfect.
more.
Okay, so we got someone up in here that says, I love BI. I am a subscriber. Yes.
Yay.
Thank you so much, everyone. And again, thank you so much, Jennifer. And we're going to hop off and now record the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.